I'm really excited to share with you some thoughts on working effectively with people and institutions who are resistant to change. Maybe to share with some of you tomorrow about power and our individual power to effect change. So I don't know about you, but when I've been in organizations and a change is announced, we tend to get a reaction where everybody is aghast and they're terrified and they just want to keep doing things the same way as is depicted in this cartoon. Sometimes we also get, we announce the changes and we get things thrown at us, bananas, apples, and so forth. And if you see this cartoon, you'll see two gentlemen hiding behind a podium with one saying to the other, "Oh, I think the announcement of the changes went really well," even though fruit and vegetables and other objects are raining in upon them as they're hiding behind the podium. And I wanted, therefore, to start with kind of a pair share exercise where you choose an emotional response that you have either felt or seen somebody express when change was recorded. I can remember when the change from work in an office to work at home was announced in March of 2020. Quite suddenly, my own reaction was uncertainty. You know, I'd like to do that. It sounds like it might be kind of fun, but how are we actually going to maintain work relationships? And how is that going to work? So if you would take a moment, there are 5 reactions listed here. Resentment. Why do I have to be the one to adapt? Distrust. Why should I do things differently when my way is better? Indifference. This isn't that big a deal, so why should I bother to change? Uncertainty was the one that I voiced at the beginning of the pandemic. And there's also inauthenticity. Well, how can I do that and still stay true to myself or not feel like I'm being manipulated or mocking the person whose values I'm adapting to? So if you will think and remember an emotional response you have seen or felt yourself when faced with an institutional change, Sam is going to put you into pairs for about 2 or 3 minutes. So make sure that you have time to share with one another your reaction to change. Sam, if you would go ahead.
Katherine, I'm assuming that you don't want to be in a breakout room?
I prefer not to be in a breakout room. I already shared.
Not a problem. Here we go. Looks like we have one group of 3.
That's fine. Okay. We'll just do this for a couple minutes and then we'll come back and share.
And if you want me to, so currently there's one room with only one person. Oh, it assigned you.
Yeah, it assigned me.
Yeah, that's why we
maybe you can put
here, let me do that. Yes.
Danny into a different room.
Yeah, it's not, it's Sama. Okay. Oh, Yasser joined. Oh, never mind.
Oh, thank you, Yasser.
Oh, now they moved. Oh.
Crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just see that if we're having other problems. And let me. Okay. Yasser's in a room by himself. I'm going to join that room real quick.
Okay. Thank you.
And ask him if he wants to move to another room.
Okay, if we got everybody back in the room now, thank you. I'd like to invite a brave soul to talk about the emotions you experienced or you saw expressed when you were faced with change. And that could be a big change or a small change, something you talked about in your small group. Yeah, I think Danny got her hand up first. Danny, if you want to go ahead.
Jenny and I were chatting about distrust, specifically tied to who's making decisions and whether decisions are made with institutional communities or are made for institutional communities. We're both going through institutional learning management system changes, and noticing that there is less engagement from community members because the decision was made on their behalf. And she's sort of earlier on in the process. So that was sort of our thoughts on our experiences with that recently.
And it's not uncommon. I see that Maha says AUC is also changing LMS. One we often had to. I don't know who was next. We'll say maybe Vivian would like to share with us.
I'm slightly slightly coherent because, as you can see, it's night. Well, it's 4 a.m.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I would say like my spidey sense tingles. Like I'm trying to figure out if I'm under threat or not. And as a person of color, like I feel
Sure.
that typically, and as a human me, I
Sure.
feel that I really need to be on the lookout for threats. Thanks.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. I think Alia and then Anna, those are the only hands I see at the moment. Go ahead, Alia.
Yes, hello everyone. Nice to see you all. My partner was Samah, and we talked about our institution, which is AUC, and how there were changes, particularly during COVID, when we had to shift to the online platform. And so we both agreed that there was no other way out other than to adapt. There was no other, way to deal with it. Worldwide, in fact, there's no other option.
Right.
So adapting was our way of dealing with this, our emotional response in a sense.
Great. Thank you, Alia and Anna.
We both Veronica and Maha and we talked about the resentment when especially when administration or I'm part of a really big system of higher education. When these things come down, they're like, you're gonna have to do these. And a lot of times they're not even explained, or it's just a lot of extra work that doesn't seem to make any real sense. And then how we kind of try to scroll around it, like to somehow avoid it or put the least amount of effort into it or anything like that. So
thank you for sharing that. I want to move from talking about emotions to talking about the physical feeling of being faced with change and the defensiveness. I'd like you you might stand up, put your arms one over another, hug them in tight to your body, right? We often do this when we're mad at somebody, maybe when we don't feel well. It's a physical feeling that often comes along when we're faced with change or we're trying to get somebody to change, right? If you keep your arms like that for a moment or put them back in that position for a moment, I'm going to stand up again. I'd like you to look down at your hands and observe which hand is on the top. You probably did this habitually, unconsciously. I'd like you to move the other hand onto the top. Onto the top. How did that feel? Can you put your arms down and do that real fast? Or do you fall into the old pattern? Would somebody like to tell me how that felt.
Very uncomfortable.
It did feel uncomfortable, yep. I
Feels
had to
wrong.
think hard. I've had to think hard practicing doing that for people myself. Anybody else?
Yes, it feels a bit wrong in a way, like
It
as if
feels
there's
wrong. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Less secure, Veronica. Thank you. How can I achieve a God scowl, right? that, listen to me, I'm your mother. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other comments? It's like eating with or writing with your left hand, but so you felt unsettled, it felt wrong, but how easy was it to do? I mean, in the end, were you harmed by it? Could you get used to it? I don't know if I could. I've been doing right-handed a long time, but I just want you to reflect on that. You don't have to answer that, but these are the sensations we feel, even if we don't acknowledge, even if we're not acknowledged them. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my PowerPoint presentation back up here, and I will get it done in a minute. Okay, share screen. There we go. No, bear with me a minute. All I'm getting is the advanced share options. There we go. Thanks for your patience. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share, I'm going to very briefly share. I'm going to run through these at kind of a fast clip to suggest some methods for working effectively across change. I will give you worksheets if you hang on till the end of that presentation. I've got a file with some worksheets that you can go to, so you'll be able to look at those afterwards. And then, Lord willing, we'll still have a little bit of time to do a practice and some more discussion together. So the first option of working with organizations or people who are resistant to change is practicing radical acceptance. That doesn't mean you roll over and say you're helpless, but we do acknowledge that the reality is real, or it's real for the reality is real for the person we're trying to interact with. We can't change it. We can't stay stuck in thoughts of this is unfair and why me, but we have to, if we want to change, we have to do something that's more productive. In my family circumstances, a lot of us like to think about the serenity prayer, which means that you're asking a higher power for the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things that you can change, and importantly, the wisdom to know the difference. I've given you a URL to tell you more about the Serenity prayer and how it's used in really tough circumstances, personal circumstances, to change one's lives and one's addictions. Practicing radical acceptance then is experiencing the situation, not judging, and acknowledging the fear and harm to oneself so that you can engage in emotional resilience practices. You can go to more wonderful equity unbound things this summer and really restore your soul. And then restored and renewed, engage across difference. I've given you a direct link here to a worksheet on practicing radical acceptance, and that'll also be in the folder that I will share with you a little bit later on in this presentation. Second way, this is more high level. This is getting into management, reframing organizations. It's a leadership book that I first encountered when I was doing my doctoral studies here in the US in Minnesota. And it suggests that there are really 4 ways that organizations operate, there's a structural frame, there's a human resources frame, there's a symbolic frame, and there's a political frame. Structural tends to be very rules, goals-oriented practices and policies. Human resources tends to be about empowerment and alignment of organizational and human needs. Symbolic is about cultural and meaning and ceremony and your stories and creating a vision. You often hear startups using this language. And then the political is about power and conflict. Or competition, but also advocacy and developing your power base. I have to tell you, when I started my graduate studies, and this book was the first thing we got in an organizational development course, and we spent, I think it was the first 6 weeks on the structural and human resources ways of organizing businesses. And I thought to myself, oh, if this is what this degree program is about, I am totally in the wrong degree program. I'm gonna have to quit. And then we got to the political and the symbolic frames, and particularly symbolic. Universities, educational associations, nonprofits often function in the symbolic, although they try to have rules and regs, but they really respond to the symbolic. And if you know how to use the symbolic frame, you will do well in this. When we got to those, as I was starting to say, I realized this was my culture. I was a child of education, and maybe I would stick around in the degree program. So I've given you a link at the bottom to learn more about these 4 frames. It's the book suggests that you can consciously use these to see organizations as multiple realities. So for example, a meeting in the structural framework is a formal occasion to make decisions, whereas in the symbolic frame, it's a sacred occasion to celebrate. We see that in academia with the rituals most often around graduation, receiving the hood and the marching and so forth. And you can, using these frameworks, learn to say, okay, what frame should I use as a leader that will help me create change? Is motivation essential? Then find out what that organization really, what are the symbols they respond to, and use that. Is technical quality important? You're probably going to want to use the structural frame and so forth. Again, we've got a URL Dr. Bowman has made. You can take a survey to find out which is your preferred leadership framing style. You can read some of the chapters, see case studies, learn how to teach. And I do want to have a shout out just to the degree programs. If you're looking for a new direction in life and wanting to understand organizational leadership and policy, the University of Minnesota has MA programs, PhD programs, and executive PhD programs that are low residency. So you only have to be there a little part of the year, and you can still work full-time for AUC or whoever you happen to work for, as the case may be. So I do want to give a shout out to them. Okay, that was one. 2 ways of dealing with people who don't want to change in organizational change theory. So this is a theory of management. You would probably get it if you were in an MBA program. Because I am an educator, did educational studies, I had no idea that such a huge body of theory existed around this. And it assumes that change works directionally in 8 steps. And these would be the 8 steps for making change happen. And my one problem with this, if I were to critique this model, is it assumes that you create an urgency through data. In other words, it's only going to really work best in the structural and HR models of organizations, probably not in the policy and symbolic organizations. It's very linear, it's non-participatory. or it gets participatory at the next stage, I would say, right? Form a powerful coalition, but that isn't necessarily equitable, right? It isn't you if your coalition is powerful, then the disempowered, the unempowered, the marginalized may not be included. So nevertheless, it's a theory. It exists. It works for some people. If you want to know more about it, or maybe more about how to combat it, I've given you the link there to have a look at it. This would probably be a good opportunity for me to say, okay, I have worksheets for you. The worksheets are in a MyFest folder at this tinyurl.com/MyFest, all capitals, change. And so are these slides. So in addition to the recording, you'll have access to the slides at this URL. There are said to be 6 methods by which you can manage resistance to change personally and organizationally: education and communication, participation and involvement, facilitation and support, negotiation and agreement, manipulation and cooperation, as well as explicit and implicit coercion. The chart here will tell you, give you an idea of what context they are most likely to work in. Again, you will have this available to you in the slides. Sorry, I keep checking time. I want to make sure we have time to share together. And work by Rosabeth Moss-Cantor, which analyzes the source of resistance. So this is a somewhat more person-oriented, although it can be manipulative, method of thinking about how to effect change. I'm looking at my chat. Thank you for Sam for sharing all these URLs in the chat. Okay. And finally, we'll take a moment to have a small, or a few moments, maybe 15. Looks like we're doing pretty well on time here. To share in groups of about 3, and then to debrief as a group what I'm going to want. So these are the tactics, and it will be obvious to you that some of them are more inclusive, some of them are less inclusive. Again, organizational leadership theory is not inclined to think equitably and in large groups. But I'd like you to share a story of a change that you participated in. Maybe it's one that you feel you were able to successfully initiate in your group, in your work, in your nonprofit, in your equity work, whatever it might be. I say, did you use one of these methods? And can you share how it worked? Is there a method that you should have done for this change to happen better? So you may want to take a screenshot of this so that you have them available, or you may just want to focus on one tactic. Think about your situation before we go into the groups and pick a tactic that you used that was effective. I'd like you to have maybe about 3 minutes per person. So we'll go for 10 minutes and then we'll come back for discussion. And if you've used a method of a tactic for creating change that you feel is more equitable than these, please also make note of that so that we can bring it out in the discussion. So I'm hoping everybody's ready. Sam, are you ready to put them in the groups of about 3? And we'll have 10 minutes. Come back at my time, it'll be about 10:40. And I think in Egypt, it'll be about 5:40.
Give me 1 second. Uh, okay. What just happened? If you choose not to, if you would like to choose not to be part of one of these groups, please just go ahead and stay out. It's very hard to, it's hard to move people around and just exclude people, particularly in the way this is set up. So if you are in a space where you don't feel like speaking, or you feel like this is not something you want to share with, please feel free to stay with us in the main room. Ready? Let me just recreate this one more time. Oh, I need to drop. Okay. Again, feel free to stay with us if you choose.
I'm seeing some comments about waiting people out. That is a tactic in academia. It often works. You wait for somebody to retire or get promoted or something else, but it does take a lot of patience and emotional resilience. Both the people I appreciate the people who stayed in the room silently waiting for those of you in the small groups to finish and hopefully to share with us. My first question would be, how did it feel to think about tactics for working with people who are resistant to change? Anna?
I think at my group we were a little frustrated because we are all like at the bottom of these hierarchies, and when you want to change
Sure.
something, then you're just labeled as a troublemaker or someone who's trying to make more work on top of other work, or and also I think, I don't know, it seemed like that's nothing against your strategies. They seem like they were
They're
really
not my strategies,
but
but yeah.
yeah, or whatever you presented there, it just
Yeah.
didn't seem helpful if you're trying to change,
To bottom up change.
bottom up change. Like it seemed like more of a top down change. So
Really important. I'll talk about power tomorrow, and I will try to remember to put in some slides about bottom up change. Thank you for that comment from your group. So there weren't any stories of success from your group. Is that what I'm hearing? But mostly frustration. I'm sorry.
yes, frustration because like it seemed like those tools would not be helpful when you are in a position where you don't really have much, you know. And then we were just sharing some examples
Yes,
of how
yeah,
we're trying to
exactly.
yeah.
Trying to get my chat open. Yes. How do you face institutions that are resistant to equity? Equity in the US is a really
Yeah.
hard concept. Equality is fine, but equity not so much.
Yeah. So we were,
Um,
I mean, I think all three of us seemed like we had come here hoping to get some tools for that. But you know, we don't know what other situations people are in. But it's been really frustrating just to muddle on my own, and especially this last year was really hard personally for me, and not very successful
Sure.
in terms of moving the needle. So on the equity
I have a resource for, let's say, pivoting small scale change against, and I'll put that in the folder by Friday. In my experience, if you don't have power behind you, and maybe that's the power of the group that's downtrodden, it can be super frustrating. Which is one reason to go back to kind of the radical acceptance and work more on emotional resilience as well as building your coalitions. Anybody else? The institution does have power. We have power. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but power in different ways. Anybody who would like to share from their group? Thank you, Anna, for sharing from yours. I'm looking for maybe a success story of a change. Maybe it wasn't in the equity front. Maybe it's somewhere else.
I think when it comes to organizational change in general, it depends on several factors, some of which includes the leadership styles and the communication styles that are being implemented. So some leaders, for example, if they're democratic, that differs a lot compared to those who are autocratic, authoritarian, bureaucratic, whatever. So there are various leadership styles out there that could sort of make this change easier or not, as well as communication styles too, whether or not the leader is supportive or not, imposing or not. So this and the team's willingness and space and the degree to which they can actually voice their concerns and have a say to what is happening can all impact this idea of change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Although I do remember back to what they called the Arab Spring, and it seemed as if people who had been disempowered suddenly found their voices and did. Maybe they made a change. Maybe they didn't make a change. They certainly advocated for change in Egypt.
True. Having a say is an important part of it. The degree to which we have a say as well.
Exactly, exactly. When some of you have a moment, if you want to go to Dr. Bowman's website and look at the 4 leadership styles, the political symbolic as opposed to the structural. The political symbolic is very powerful, as we did see in Egypt in I think it was 2011, correct me if I'm wrong, against the structural in certain situations. And if you take his quiz about what's your more natural leadership style, and maybe you can begin to understand the contexts in which you will lead better and affect more change. That's kind of all I can say about that. I'd welcome another comment or two. I do acknowledge the frustration. It is always hard to do this work. And that's part of why we have MYFest, I think, to work on that emotional resilience. Anybody else who would like to offer a comment?
We talked a little bit in our group just about how it can change based on the context. So, you know, I teach sustainability, so a lot of what I do is introducing people to different ways of being things. And if I'm not really welcoming in that space, then it doesn't work. But there are other times that, you know, maybe I'm trying to advocate for change in the institution, that I have to be much more bullheaded. Or if,
Yes.
you know, I'm trying to protect my team from something that we're maybe implementing a change and that has repercussions elsewhere, but the change has to happen. Then I can be the bull in the china shop, if I need to be. And so just being able to respond to what the situation needs, I think, is really key to all of this.
Thanks, Ty. I wonder if you or someone in your group had a bit of a success story and using specific tactics that you're able to share that would help with the frustration that some of the other group members here are feeling.
Well,
I don't want to push too hard, but
I mean, I'm at I'm in the last days of my semester at the moment, so my brain is entirely
Okay,
on my teaching,
okay,
but
I get it.
I will say that in that space, I hear from the students all the time that because they got to bring in their own experiences and because they felt like they mattered, they were much more engaged with learning about things and wanting to make change because they could see the connections to themselves. And so I think in that space, you know, and it has been things like, you know, they're starting to realize that they only look at one story and maybe they should consider other people's stories and learn more about where other people are coming from, both on the, you know, oh, this person is more sustainable for me, but also on the, this person is really less sustainable than me, and I don't understand why they're not just doing it. And realizing that they need to listen to everybody and consider more perspectives. I think, yeah, so that, I mean, that's my current one at the moment.
No,
because of where I'm
thanks,
at.
Ty. I really appreciate it. And you brought to mind a conference I attended last week with a very powerful plenary speaker on anti-racism. And he talked about one way he makes change is by teaching and by empowering those younger folks. And that's kind of a little bit, it's a wait them out strategy, right? Replace the old guard by creating a new guard. I did see a hand up and now I've lost it. I'm sorry.
It's
I
Veronica.
forget.
That's Veronica. If she
Thank you, Veronica. Are you still with us? Can you?
Yeah, I don't mind. I could give you a success story, either being a person pushing for institutional change or resisting. Which would be more repetitive?
I would accept either. I don't know if we can get thumbs up for resisting. Yeah. Go ahead. I saw a few thumbs up.
So I, at my former institution, was a bit of a firebrand. And one of the big things that came down the pike was an LMS change. So all of my sympathy to colleagues who are going through an LMS change. We also existed within a consortium model where another campus wanted to make a switch to a radically different LMS from the one that we had been using, which of course would have resulted in a massive amount of course redesign, adaptation to the new system. And all of this was supposed to take place during COVID, when we had already been like, geez, we've moved everything online. Everyone's stretched real thin. The burnout is very real. So this had been coming down and we were resistant. I was the chair of a committee that was focused on technology. We were resistant. We asked for budget data. We asked for information about how faculty would be supported. We asked for data. They did not have it, of course. So instead, I participated in the piloting of the platform to see what would it take for a reasonably competent person to transform one of their courses. What would they gain? What would they lose? How much time would it take? I gathered the data myself and I presented it to the university and I presented it to my colleagues. I took a census of roughly how many faculty members we had, core, adjunct, term, how much time it would take, how much instructional design time it would take. It was a massive number. And the administration was sort of hands off with it. They didn't want to get involved in any way in making the decision. They were comfortable to just let the other campus steamroll. The faculty senate, however, passed a resolution against it, seeing how much time and effort it would take in the face of everything else that was going on. So our campus resisted that change. And I'm really glad that we did, because we discovered after the fact that we came about that LMS change through some rather inappropriate budgetary means. And it doesn't seem as if anyone really wanted the LMS change on the other campus either. So there's some suggestion that the house is divided on the other campus. The campus I used to serve at is fine because they've switched to the same LMS, newer model. They are fine. They didn't have to deal with all of that.
Thank you, Veronica. I think I heard that data did work. It helped you create a coalition. You called in allies. you thought about other stakeholders who were invested, such as the faculty senate. So a collection of those tactics that really work together. Yes, and Sam says, yeah, grassroots when they're a group of champions, but also maybe consciously. I don't know whether you did this, Veronica, consciously, but thought about those steps for change, but from a resistor point of view. I did want to, I'm going to put in the chat here. This is from a different training that I've done, but it's about pivoting away from racist and equity structures, small changes that you can do with your group, with your team. Racism doesn't want us to change it. It's very good at dividing us against one another. Racism, oppression, inequity, whatever we call it in our national context. These are small actions you can do that will give you and your other grassroots folks hope of changing the system from within. So that's and those are resources from Tema Okune's Divorcing White Supremacy Culture. And student protest, I really don't have time to go there today. We have 5 minutes left. I would welcome any other comments of frustration or of success, as the case may be, before we draw this to a close. But I'm about done. You definitely thought about the change. Thank you for that, Veronica, an organizational psychologist. Okay. Recruit an organizational psychologist to your team seems to be our message of the day, perhaps. Any final comments? And then otherwise I will say thank you all for showing up. And I hope some of you have the time to show up tomorrow, where we will talk a little bit about power and the power to create change.
Thank you, Catherine. Again, if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback, I believe Yasser reposted the link to the feedback form. We invite you to give that feedback on this session, and we look forward to seeing you in future MYFest sessions. Thanks all.